People in Wisconsin have died. Another has been hospitalized because of West Nile virus. The Wisconsin Department of Health Services says the first 3 human cases of the virus in the state were reported in Outagamie, Fond du Lac, and Brown counties in northeastern Wisconsin. The people who died, a man in his 50s, a man in his 70s, a woman in her 80s is hospitalized right now. DHS is reminding everyone to prevent mosquito bites when outdoors. People with weakened immune systems have the greatest risk, but people of all ages can get West Nile.